reduced the federal deficit by $160 billion. Hear me? $160 billion, you know? And we've cut deficit by the time it's out, over $2 trillion. We've cut the deficit. And while I'm paying for it, we're also reducing the federal debt at the same time. You know, the Republicans talk about, big tax and Democrats. Give me a break. Come on. I've already cut the federal deficit by $1 trillion since I took office. My Republican friends tell me we're spending a lot of money. It's saving billions of dollars. Saving billions of dollars. We're actually cutting the deficit, too. With Maggie and your delegation's help, I've already cut the federal deficit by $1 trillion.
It's wild how comfortable these people are lying. It's crazy. It's like something goes wrong with your soul when you're there. Republicans do this too. They're all over the news today too, telling you how great this whole thing is. Joining me now, great senator from the state of Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul, one of the few people actually trying to stop all this craziness, as he often does. Also, you should go buy that book he wrote, Deception. That's pretty apropos for where we are. Senator, do these people genuinely not understand the fiscal collapse that's coming? It's coming. Everyone knows it. It's math. Did they not know?
You know, I think math is not the strong suit of our president. He has a little bit of trouble with the English language, but definitely trouble with math. He seems to interchange deficit and debt a lot. And so at one point in that clip you showed, he says he's reducing the debt, which is an absolute falsehood. The debt is growing exponentially. We're up to over 34 trillion in debt, and it's climbing every day. In the next year, the spending proposals that the Democrats are going to vote for, and probably 10 or 15 Republicans will join them to pass, as well as the majority in the House have voted for this now, will add to the debt 1.5 trillion. Now, the little trickery that's being performed here is, and sleight of hand is, that the debt did get enormously bad. The worst records were under COVID, when they shut the entire economy down, the lockdowns that I opposed. They passed out checks to everyone. The deficit in 1 year actually exceeded 3 trillion. So the record was set during the COVID lockdowns. But it's disingenuous to say, oh, they're not quite as bad as they were under the worst deficits ever, to mean that there's not any deficits. The deficits over $1 trillion a year is alarming. The Federal Reserve Chairman warned about this. Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan Chase warned about this. There are many authors warning that the debt is unsustainable, and that's why I'm fighting against these bills, loaded with earmarks, loaded with waste, and really loaded with deficit spending.
How gross is this bill, Senator? I know, of course, they dropped it in the dead of night, as they always do. And look, it's 1.2 trillion. That number alone is disgusting. But what all is in this disaster?
Well, we haven't yet categorized it all yet. We have the one from last week that we passed on. We now know what was in what we passed last week, had 6,000 earmarks and $12 billion worth of earmarks. I don't yet have a total on this week's earmarks or things, but we're going through it page by page. We'll be lucky if we get a first read through before the final vote on this. The final vote will probably happen tomorrow. And people have to realize Republicans have absolutely abdicated the power of the purse. We have a majority in the House, and we have a filibuster-proof minority in the Senate. What does that mean? It takes 60 votes to pass this spending bill. If all Republicans held together, it wouldn't pass, and we would have the leverage to actually reduce spending. Instead, we have collaborators, fellow travelers, who will work with the Democrats, and they will pass this bloated spending bill. But unfortunately, Speaker Johnson has gone along with them in the House. So really, the power of the purse has been abdicated. When I go home, people are like, we elected you Republicans. We elected Republicans as a majority in the House, and you're not using your power. They're absolutely right. Republicans in the House who voted for the spending bill and the Republicans in the Senate who vote with the Democrats for this bill have abdicated the power of the purse, and they're not doing what they were elected to do. And I hope people at home will be very unhappy with them and maybe bring some of them back into the private sector and send up replacements.
Yeah, I think you're right, Senator. I'll be honest with you, and I've had him on the show before. His voting record actually isn't all that bad. I'm so incredibly disappointed in Speaker Johnson. It's not that I expected him to move mountains with a tiny majority, but what have we accomplished at all? Anything?
Well, here's what should have happened or what could happen. He can't win everything. I acknowledge that, but he has the majority in the House, and then he also has, we have a filibuster-proof minority in the Senate. If the Senate leadership and Mike Johnson got together and went to Schumer and said, well, you're wanting to spend $6 trillion and we want to spend $5 trillion. So why don't we split the difference and spend $5.5 trillion? That's not happening. What happens is all of the spending is on autopilot. The entitlement spending is going up 5 to 6%. They're all afraid to look at entitlements. Then the military is going up 3%. They're not willing to look at that. So really, they're only looking at 16% of the budget, the non-military discretionary, and they're just whittling tiny little bits away from that. But they've made the mistake, and many people in Washington make this mistake, is when you take entitlements off the table, that's 2/3 of the spending. So 2/3 of government's on autopilot, just goes on and on and on, and nobody's doing anything about 2/3 of the spending. So if you ignore 2/3 of the spending, the deficit can never be addressed. The budget that we vote for is military and non-military discretionary. That's about 1.5 trillion. That's equal to the deficit. The entire budget I vote on is being borrowed.
Okay, so how do we address these entitlements? I know it's the political third rail. I know the second you bring up the word Social Security, you might as well start packing up your office because you're getting ready to get kicked out of office. I understand all that. At the same time, it is going to collapse the country. So do we just wait until that? Do we wait 5 years until it's out and then we deal with it?
I think being honest on entitlements isn't the third rail of politics. I ran in 2009 for the first time, and I told people that the age of Social Security must be raised. I've told people that we probably are going to have higher deductibles for Medicare. I've told people that all of these things are going bankrupt, and it's not that I want to have reforms, it's that if we don't have the reforms, there will be no Social Security for the next generation, and there will be no Medicare. And it's going to happen pretty quickly. Within the next couple of years, the people who live on the basic smallest amount of Social Security, which I believe is around $700 a month, those people will get a 20% cut in their Social Security unless we reform it. So you have to reform it. In fact, I think the people that are disingenuous on this are the AARP, who sends out letters saying, tell Rand Paul to get his hands off my Social Security. Well, you know, if we do nothing to Social Security like AARP wants, it will fail, and it will utterly fail the poorest among us and hurt them the worst. So, no, I think the entitlements are not a third rail. Honest with people. People are willing to be honest. If you tell them the age has to go up because we're living longer, they haven't voted me out because I've said that. I've introduced bills that would actually raise the age of Social Security gradually, a couple of months a year. And what happens is it's not as noticeable to people. Like right now, the people going retiring would have to wait 3 months. And next year, the people retiring would have to wait 4 months. And next year, they'd have to wait 5 months. And over about a 20-year period, you raise the age to probably about 70. We already did this once. In 1983, we raised the age from 65 to 67 for Social Security. We need to do it again for Social Security, very gradually raise it to 70, or actually attach it to longevity. And so I've sort of jokingly said, if you live to be 120, you'll get your Social Security at 115. But it's the only way it pays for itself in order to stay afloat. Most European countries do this. You know, Bernie Sanders says he loves the socialism of Sweden. Sweden's age is 70 and going up based on their longevity. Sweden takes their entitlements and actually only allots as much as they're going to spend that year, and then they readdress their entitlements the next year. They actually look at entitlement spending every year as part of their budgetary process. That's what we need to do. Sweden balances their annual budget. Bernie thinks they're a socialist nation, but they actually balance their budget. Now, they do it differently than I would do it. They do it with very high taxes. What I would do it is with lowered spending. I would do it with a smaller government, because then the engine of capitalism roars. When you lower the spending and have less taxation, you have an enormous economy. And we've got some of that from the tax cut of 2017, but we get even more if we would actually restrain spending.
Senator, real quick, just to wrap things up here, this TikTok bill, look, I'm just not trustful. I don't like TikTok. I don't have TikTok. My kids don't have TikToks. I just don't understand why this Congress could pass a good bill. I should say I don't think this Congress is capable of passing anything good and decent. But you're in the Senate. I'm not. What say you?
You know, I don't really like Facebook either. I don't use YouTube. And the reason I don't use YouTube is because they censor me. I don't agree with their politics, so I use Rumble. And so when you don't like something, you don't use it. If you don't think your kids should be on it, don't use it. But here's the interesting thing. They've written a bill that gives the president the authority to shut down anybody they think has foreign influence or foreign influence is controlling their company. Well, right now, as we sit, Apple has a lot of business in China. Everybody has an Apple phone in China. The data, because the Chinese government demands it, has to be on Chinese servers that are owned by the government within the country of China. So does that mean Apple is under the control of a foreign country, a foreign adversary like China? And I'm not advocating this, but I'm worried that the bill would actually allow the government to force the sale of Apple as well. They're also telling Apple that they can't put this on the App Store, which I think is going to be a First Amendment problem, because the App Store now is full of things where you express yourself. And if the government says that you can't have an app on your phone that allows you to put your dance videos up, is that a First Amendment violation, not only of the people putting up dance videos, 170 million Americans, but it also may be a First Amendment abridgment to the App Store of Apple, forbidding them from having different speech applications in their App Store. We know that this has been tried 3 times so far, and the federal courts have looked at bans of TikTok 3 times, and they've been found unconstitutional on First Amendment rights. But the other thing that's important to know is people aren't being honest about this. On Fox News, they're saying, oh, it's owned by the communist government. Well, that's provably false. TikTok is owned by 60% international investors, 20% the 2 Chinese guys that are software engineers that created the app, and 20% by their employees, which are 7,000 of those employees are Americans. We also know they hold their data on the Oracle Cloud, and they've agreed to have Oracle review any kind of data problems or accusations. The TikTok board is 3 out of 5 Americans. So there's a Fifth Amendment problem here. If I wanted to come and take your broadcasting, or whoever broadcasts your signal, or how you get your word out, if I wanted to take that from you, I can't take that. I can accuse you of being a communist spy, but I can't take it unless I go to court and prove that you are. That's what the Fifth Amendment is about. It's about due process. The government can't take your property. So TikTok is property, and some of that property is owned by Americans. So all these people making accusations, they just have to prove that in court if you want to take someone's property away from them. You have to put them in jail, and you have to prove it in court. If you don't do that, and you let the government make these decisions, my goodness, you think they're going to let you or I speak if the government gets a choice to shut us down? Yeah. Already we have YouTube shutting me down. And so it's like, I don't know. I worry about having the government more ability to censor speech.
I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel.
I'm not going to elaborate on the speech. He made a good speech, and I think he expressed a serious concern shared not only by him but by many Americans.
What is wrong with advocating for elections in a democracy?
I don't think people have really taken in how big of a deal it is that Democrats are calling for Netanyahu's head. I don't care whether you are a Democrat. I don't care whether you like Netanyahu. Israel is an ally of the United States of America. It's not some country we colonized. American politicians getting up and calling for the ouster of a leader of an ally, I don't know that it's something I've ever seen before. I bet Lee will remember. He's a lot smarter than me. Joining me now, Lee Smith, columnist at Tablet Magazine. Lee, honestly, I'm dumb. Have you ever seen that before? The American politicians, Republicans or Democrats, looking at an ally and saying, hey, get rid of that guy?
Well, actually, they've been trying to topple Netanyahu. The Biden administration has been trying to topple Netanyahu from the beginning, or from when Netanyahu returned as prime minister. So no, they don't like him at all. What's shocking here, I agree, Jesse, it's shocking, but what sticks out for me is Israel is in the middle of a very big war in response to the October 7th massacre. So that's what's surprising, and that's what's appalling to lots of people, and that's what makes the Schumer speech bizarre and horrifying, especially from a man who has at least said, if he's not proven, but at least said that he's determined to advance Israeli security, to advance the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's very surprising to hear him call to topple right now the government of Israel.
Lee, for me, maybe I'm just too cynical, but for me, this, honestly, it looks very simple to me. It's not that Democrats care about Israel. It's not that they care about Hamas. They don't really care about any of this stuff. They realize this entire thing has created domestic problems for them with their Jewish voting base, with their Muslim voting base, and they really just want this whole thing to go away. They just want the whole thing to stop. That's what it looks like to me, but tell me, am I all wet on that?
Well, we keep seeing in the press, Jesse, we keep seeing in the press about, the Biden team, Biden campaign is very, very worried about Michigan and worried about Minnesota because of a very large Arab American and Muslim population. And, Muslim Americans, American Muslims are very upset about what's happening in Gaza. Yeah, no, that's not what's happening, right? And it's not the progressive base. It's not just the kids who are marching around college campus demanding Jewish genocide or going from the river to the sea. This is the Democrats, right? It's not just progressives. This is who the Democrats are. And it goes back to the man who's the real leader of the party, Barack Obama, right? Barack Obama doesn't like Israel. Barack Obama gave the Iranians or legalized Iran's nuclear weapons program. So look, when they're saying Michigan, right, we're always suspicious of the mainstream press, as we should be. So when the mainstream press is saying, yeah, well, the real problem is Michigan here, and it's an electoral issue. It's about crunching numbers here heading into November. That's not it. The Democratic Party leadership right now despises Israel. Again, and we can say that's one of the things that's surprising about Schumer, that Schumer appears to have jumped from the pro-Israel side of American politics to the anti-Israel side. But of course, that side is becoming increasingly small in the Democratic Party. And Schumer's jump perhaps indicates that there's a very little, there's almost no room left on that raft aside for John Fetterman. John Fetterman is the Democratic legislator who is most supportive of Israel right now. The rest of the Democrats, they're not there, and it's not just about Bibi. It's about Israel again in the middle of a war.
Okay, then what's the axe to grind between, because you're obviously right, Obama and his lackeys and all the dirty commies that go along with him, and Israel? What's the rift there?
Well, I mean, there's a number of different ways to put this. I think, frankly, we have to say Obama just doesn't like Israel. There's lots of people, there's people on our side, on the right, who just don't like Israel for a number of different reasons. And it's not really about the aid money, because there's a very good argument to be made from the right about why Israel shouldn't get U.S. aid, why it's better for Israel and why it's better for the United States. But that's fundamentally where Barack Obama is and has been for a very long time. He doesn't like Israel. There is a strategic argument to be made too, or a strategic framework in which to understand this, in which the Obama administration, which the Democratic Party, still led by Barack Obama, believes that we should partner with the Islamic Republic of Iran in the Middle East. And to do that, to upgrade relations with Iran, we have to downgrade relations, not just with Israel, but with other traditional American allies in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia. So the point is to elevate Iran and downgrade everyone else. And of course, Hamas is one of Iran's proxy forces, along with the other proxy forces in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis as well, and of course, Lebanon, Hezbollah and Lebanon as Iran's long arm on the Eastern Mediterranean. So the Biden team, in line with Obama's vision, is very keen to make things okay with Iran and its proxies around the region. So again, that's the strategic overlay for that vision. But I think, again, it's very important to understand what's really at the core of this. And this is that, Barack Obama does not like Israel. And it doesn't matter whether it's Benjamin Netanyahu who's leading that government or someone else.
Okay, so the Fed is confusing for normal people. That's why we need smart people to come on the show to explain things for us. Jerome Powell spoke today. I don't understand. Why aren't we cutting rates? Anyway, joining me now, Peter St. Onge of the amazing Heritage Foundation. He's an economist. Okay, Peter, why aren't they cutting rates? Rates are really high and it hurts and people can't get home loans and it's hurting the economy. What's going on?
It is. All of those things are true. Interest rates are at a level right now where they're squeezing regular people. So you've got mortgages up around 7%. You've got all these problems. High rates hit the banks. That's why we had a bunch of bank collapses last year. They're also bad for companies. There's this wall of corporate debt coming in. There's this wall of real estate, commercial real estate loans. So high rates are a serious problem. The issue here is that the Fed knows that if it cuts rates again, that is going to make inflation go higher. And the background here is that right now, inflation is taking off, right? So if we go back to the last 5 months, so last October, inflation was bumping along at an annualized 1%. Okay, so it went up to 1.9 in November, 2.8 December, 3.5 in January. Latest number is February. Last month, it was 5.4% annualized. So inflation is absolutely taking off. The Fed is now stuck. They're in a spot where they've got to keep rates high to at least try to keep a lid on that. And then they just keep shooting $1 trillion at anything that goes wrong. So they already shot a bunch of money at the banks. They shoot it at Wall Street. Anything they can find, they just launch $1 trillion at that. Of course, every trillion they print that way is going to lead to future inflation. So the Fed has screwed up so far. It looks like they pulled off the catastrophe they ran in the 1970s, where they launched this massive inflation, hiked rates to break the economy, and even then it ripped off again. In the 70s, it went on for another 5 years after that of high inflation. So we'll see if they manage that one again.
Peter, can you explain to people like me why 2% annualized inflation is the target? Because these smart people talk about it all the time, that's what they're going for. But for the average person like me, I don't understand why my money needs to inflate at all, let alone 2%. How did we get to this number?
Yeah, absolutely right. And, they got the smoke and mirrors on it, but fundamentally, there is no science behind any of this crap. It's fundamentally public relations, propaganda. The Fed's job, the reason why central banks exist, including the Fed, is to print money, to create inflation. All right, before the Fed existed in this country, we had about 150 years with no inflation. Inflation is not built into the economy. It's not a fact of life. It is created by central banks. So why does the Fed have a 2% target? Because it thinks that's the most it can steal. Right, my favorite metaphor is a gasoline thief. All right, let's say you're going and stealing some gas out of all your neighbors' cars every night. All right, the trick to that game is don't take too much at once. They're gonna notice. It's exactly how central banks operate. So they stick to 2% because they think they can get away with it. Some random banker came up with it in New Zealand 30 years ago. There's no science, there's no logic to it. And in fact, there's a bunch of Democrat inflationists who want to crank that up. So they want to get it to 3, 4, whatever they can get away with. Of course, at that point, the people start getting upset. They start voting for populists.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, I want to circle back to something you talked about the commercial real estate loan industry. I remember during COVID, the lockdowns, I had to go to New York City for some stupid media thing, but I had to go to this office building. And it was something like 50 stories. And Peter, 3 stories were in use. Everything else was empty, and they were emptying out. I have been told that places like New York City now, speaking of which, they're at 50% occupancy for all of its corporate stuff. Is that what's driving this corporate loan crisis? The fact that these people who own these commercial properties, no one wants to rent them anymore.
Yeah, you always get commercial real estate going through this kind of boom bust cycle. And usually that's driven by the Fed, right? So what the Fed typically does is lower rates, interest rates. They lower it to make money cheap, all right? And then that, you kind of get this tissue fire in the economy. You get all these stupid like .com and crypto and all this crap. Just basically money is so cheap that idiots are getting it and they're playing around with it. And then the Fed usually hikes interest rates real high because it's got to stop the inflation it caused with all that cheap money. All right, so you get that boom bust cycle. Now in that, commercial real estate is always hit really hard, right? There's a lot of idiots in commercial real estate. There's very big numbers in play. You got hundreds of millions for an individual property. So they get this flood of money. You get this big tissue fire in commercial real estate. And then when the Fed hikes rates, it comes crashing down. So that's a normal cycle. That's kind of how this launched. The problem with this particular one, the reason why it's such a problem is exactly what you're talking about with COVID. it's not just COVID, the kind of work from home that a lot of companies went to permanently. You've also got this intentional mismanagement of America's cities where, I mean, they're turning into these like apocalyptic hellscapes. You know, downtown San Francisco, I mean, you had to sell your firstborn to get office space on Market Street in San Francisco, right? And now it's all taken over by junkies. So all of those properties, every single one of those properties is covered in junkies now. Somebody took out like a $300 million loan for that sucker. It's sitting on some bank's books. Ooh. All right. And right now, what the banks are doing is they give them new money to service the loan so everybody can pretend that the loan is healthy. All right. Because once the loan is no longer being serviced, that's a big red mark on their book, and then the regulators have to come in and they have uncomfortable conversations. So there was actually a study, it went up in the NBER recently. They were saying that there could be 400 regional banks in the US under threat because of that collapse in commercial real estate.
Oh, I'm so unbelievably uncomfortable right now. Just the thought of a $300 million loan and a property. Oh my gosh. Okay, Peter, I want to finish up with this, the housing market, because that is it's more applicable to everybody watching right now. Yeah. It's a very sad fact of life. Many Americans, more Americans than any time in my lifetime, cannot buy a home right now. Why can't normal people afford a home anymore?
Yeah, well, the prices skyrocketed. Again, thanks to the Fed. So the Fed pumped out the easy money, home prices went up. And then when the Fed tried to, hide what it dumped on the living room carpet, it jacked rates up. So now mortgages go up. If prices go up and mortgages go up, it becomes out of reach for regular people to get a house. So right now, if you want to qualify for the median house, we're not talking a mansion, the median house, you got to make $100,000 a year, all right? And your monthly payment on a new mortgage is going to be close to $3,000. That's like half of household income for the median family. So houses are absolutely out of reach. And what we're seeing now is young people, they are completely giving up, right? People in their 20s, it used to be that's when you're going to build up for your house, you're going to start a family, you're going to start building a future, your financial foundation. No, they're giving up. They go out, they take a cruise to the Bahamas. They don't bother getting married. They're not going to have kids. Why? Because this is all out of reach. So for the first time, we got kids. They grew up in a house that their parents owned, all right? And they're like 40 years old eating ramen with the roommates now. That is a lifestyle that is unimaginable to them at this point. And I think it's just going to keep getting worse. The pressures between the house prices, the rates are going to stay high now. We just had a Fed meeting today. They said they're going to keep it higher for longer. So those mortgage rates are going to stay up. And then, you got these other things jumping in, like home insurance is so high now. You got about 20 million Americans who are actually going without insurance. All these costs are slamming the door closed to people buying a house. That means they're going to be renters forever. If you're a renter forever, you are building nothing. You are not building a retirement. You're not building the basis for a family.
Did you witness the president commit a crime? Is it your testimony today?
Yes.
And what crime have you witnessed?
How much time do I have to go through it?
It is simple. You name the crime. Did you watch him steal something?
Corruption statutes, RICO and conspiracy.
What is it? What is the crime, sir? Specifically.
You asked me to answer the question. I answered the question.
No.
RICO, you're obviously not familiar with. Corruption statutes.
Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime. It is a category.
I'm sorry. Such an idiot. Joining me now, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the big cheese in that whole hearing yesterday, Congressman from the great state of Ohio, Congressman Jim Jordan. Congressman, be honest, is it hard to keep a straight face when you see someone making an absolute ASS of themselves out there? Is it hard to keep, do you even bother trying to keep a straight face?
Well, I mean, think about this is what Fani Willis is the whole point of that. Those charges against President Trump and I think 18 other people, which is ridiculous, but that's the basis. So it's obviously a crime. I think it's being falsely used down there in Georgia, but when she said it wasn't. But this has been a week of strange things, by the way, Jesse, because I went to the argument, a different issue, but I went to the argument at Supreme Court on Monday, and we had a Supreme Court justice actually say to the Solicitor General from Louisiana, your position, counselor, has the First Amendment hamstringing the government. And I'm sitting there. This is one of those moments where you almost forget you're in a place where you got to keep proper decorum, where you almost want to just stand up and say, that's the point. I mean, I turned to my colleague beside me. I'm like, that's the whole point of the First Amendment. So this has been a week for some strange things said by people on the left. But that one was big, obviously, yesterday in the hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And it was obviously a rough day for Democrats. Tony Bobulinski very clearly has an axe to grind with these people, and he's a wealth of information because he worked with these people. The Bidens looked really bad yesterday, didn't they?
I think so. And I think there's an obstruction concern potentially here because all the changing stories we got from the Biden White House, I was never had anything to say or do with anything relative to my son's business in China. Well, then that all moved to my father was not financially involved with the business. Sure looks like he was based on some of the evidence we have, but that changed. And then, of course, the Justice Department story changed multiple times after the whistleblowers came forward and told us how ridiculous this investigation was being done. And that was sort of all confirmed when they took the sweetheart deal to the court, and the court basically laughed at it and said, what are you bringing here? We can't accept this. And then they named the very guy who took the sweetheart deal to the court that got laughed out of court. That's the guy they make special counsel. I mean, so I think there's all kinds of potential bad behavior here that Mr. Bobulinski highlighted so much of yesterday.
There was, and a lot of this obviously lands at Joe Biden's feet. Everyone knows this is Joe Biden's business. It's not Hunter Biden's business. That idiot wasn't running anything. It was Joe Biden running things. So if the president was running, I don't even know if I should call it criminal enterprise. It's certainly seen that way. If the president's been running a criminal enterprise for about the last 30 years, are there charges brought? Where do we go from here? It looks really bad.
Yeah, we continue our work. As I said yesterday, there's no time limit in the Constitution on doing our duty to have oversight of the executive branch. So we're going to do that. There's still other witnesses we would like to talk to, particularly 2 lawyers in the Justice Department that the Justice Department is telling us no right now. We may have to actually go to court on this. But we want to talk to these 2 lawyers because they're the ones who sort of came in and changed where that investigation into Hunter Biden was going to go. So there's people we need to talk to. And at some point, we'll have to decide as a conference, should we do articles? Are there the votes for those articles? But what I said yesterday is we don't do snap impeachments like the Democrats do. We actually go for the facts and dig into the facts and the truth. And that's what we're trying to present to the American people. And then we'll decide if we have articles and if we actually go to a vote.
Do you believe the votes are even potentially there? And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not very hopeful. I look at all these garbage that's barely passing, GOP defections all over the place. It's hard to imagine, especially with Santos gone, with Kevin McCarthy resigning, it's hard to imagine we have enough people to actually impeach. But do you believe that's possible?
Well, again, I don't know. You're right. The majority is so tight. It's tough to pass just about anything. So I'm not pretending that we're going to have the votes one way or the other. All I'm saying is I think it's incumbent upon us to get the facts. We're going to do that. I anticipate we will do some kind of report, whether we go to articles of impeachment or not. I believe we will have a report that lays this all out in a straightforward way. I mean, I think the way I try to say it is the money, the business, the brand, and how that was all put together. I think people got a good feel for that from yesterday's hearing. Millions of dollars coming from foreign entities through 20 different companies for what? What were they providing? And I think the answer we got was from Hunter Biden's business partner, Devon Archer, last summer, when he told us in his deposition under oath, it was access to the brand. And the brand was Joe Biden. Mr. Galanis talked about the Biden lift, which was another way they described the brand. They talked about this idea that, say it, forget it, write it, regret it. This motto, this slogan, this mantra they live by, the rule they live by is you keep all that quiet, but sometimes it even got written down in the form of like the big guy. So I do think there's a lot there, but we'll have to see if there are ever the votes to actually bring articles forward.
All right, let's talk about the IRS. You opened up an investigation into the IRS today, something about AI spying on us. What's this all about?
Think about what they can do if they can take it to scale and use artificial intelligence. We already have reports where people have said, oh yeah, we can do this. We can see everything companies are doing, individuals are doing. Someone on the inside, this was Mr. O'Keefe was able to get some of this audio of this guy saying this. So that is scary when you think about in the broad context, a Justice Department that said, we're going to investigate parents at school board meetings, an FBI which said if you're pro-life Catholic, you're extremist, a government that pressured big tech to censor American speech, a government that asked big banks, hey, give us the transaction data of your customers, debit card, credit card purchases. Are they shopping at Bass Pro Shop, or are they buying religious texts? How dare someone get a Bible and go buy a gun at Dick's Sporting Goods? So that's the kind of scary context and framework we have. And then we find out, the IRS is thinking about announced how thrilled they were to be able to use AI to deal with people who may not be paying their taxes. We're afraid of it from the other side, where they're coming after you, particularly in light of things like Ketanji Brown Jackson said at the Supreme Court, where, we're nervous about the First Amendment hamstringing the government, which is exactly what the First Amendment's supposed to do. That's the context. And then we see this statement that this guy made, sort of bragging about AI and what that would allow the IRS to do. And as I've said before, I think that's an old Newt Gingrich line, you think about the IRS. I mean, the IRS knocks on your door. Your first response isn't, oh, joy, one of my public servants is here to help me today. I mean, this is the IRS, for goodness sake. So if they got this kind of power where they can do it at scale in that kind of time frame, man, that's frightening stuff.
That is. All right, one last thing. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson went on TV, I think this was last week, and he was talking about some cuts, and I was thrilled with the headline. Anyway, here he was, cuts to DOJ. Here he was.
We have advanced, and we also advanced, as you've seen the summary, cuts to some of the agencies that we believe are really overreaching and have been turned in some ways against the American people. We're going to cut 3% from DOJ, 7% from the ATF, 6% from the FBI, and 10% from the EPA, and that's just a start.
Well, that's a great start, but we have this spending package going through $1.2 trillion. People can't figure out how many bills there are. Are there 6? Are there 2? Is it 1? Either way, are we getting cuts? What's happening with all this?
We're getting some reductions, but remember, there were huge increases under the Democrats, so the reduction is not, frankly, where it needs to be. But look, in divided government, I appreciate the reductions there. I think there was a better strategy if we could have corralled the votes, which again is tough when you only got a 1 vote majority. I think there was a better way we could have done this, but we appreciate some of the cuts we've got in this legislation. I'm not going to support it. I thought there was much better ways we could have done this strategically and everything else. And by the way, we haven't stopped what's already been appropriated for the FBI headquarters. We just said we didn't just get no new money for that, but it's already in there. So the very FBI that says pro-life Catholics are extremists, who helped the DOJ, who told big tech, be ready. We think there might be, in October of 2020, there might be a Russian information operation involving Hunter Biden and a laptop, even though they had the laptop and knew it was real. Do they really need a new headquarters? I don't think so. So I think there's some of those concerns that many of us still have and will not support the bill on the floor tomorrow.
Wow. Steve, this is from the FBI's latest jobs post. During Women's History Month, the FBI proudly reaffirms its commitment to the 30 by 30 initiative, which pledges to increase the representation of women in recruiting classes to at least 30% by 2030. Steve, that doesn't sound like the FBI is looking for the best and brightest. It sounds like the FBI just cares if it's a woman.
It does. It doesn't sound like the FBI is actually familiar with the law either, because Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 says that you can't be prejudiced against anyone based on their genitalia in your hiring practice. So it's good to know that for the remainder of the decade, the FBI will be prejudiced against men applying. But it kind of goes with what we've seen from the FBI. They're not dismantling the FBI. They're building one. They're building one of people that are happy to just follow orders or just gleeful about doing the things that Kyle talked about, investigating someone for First Amendment protected speech. And obviously our elected officials in Washington, D.C., there's not enough Eye of Newt or a reindeer antler extract that's going to raise their T levels enough to defund this out of control, woke and weaponized agency. It's going to fall to local law enforcement, constitutional sheriffs, and ultimately state representatives to pass laws so they can stand in the bulwark against an out of control FBI and DOJ.
Kyle, why haven't there been more of guys like you and Steve and Garrett? Obviously, you guys know I love Garrett, but and I'm thrilled. I just can't tell you how much I respect the fact you guys gave up your career for this. But why are there 3 of you. And I realize there have probably been a couple others, but there aren't that many. FBI is pretty big. Where's everyone else?
They're addicted to comfort, like a lot of Americans are. They like getting that paycheck. They've said as much. We've got a private chat where we have eyes on to about 1% of the entirety of the FBI, which is actually a lot of people, a couple hundred people. And one of them just said, I'm disgusted with this agency. Some of the public figures are as well. But I can't give up my paycheck. And so even when they know, I have people that tell me the work I do is decent. I've had guys that have been in for 15 years and they say, I do decent work every single day and our agency is utterly irredeemable. How are politicians not following through with this kind of stuff? That is a damning indictment. That is a terminal and fatal flaw to have in a law enforcement agency that's just doing intelligence work. And we know they're doing intelligence work, that's the bulk of what they're doing. And they're not doing it intelligently either. They're spying on Americans. They're using national security tools. They're hiding behind these parallel investigations. And they're not doing the things that most Americans think that they would do, like going after bank robbers or fraud or trying to protect our resources. They're not doing that. They're simply engaging in partisan politics, and they're terrified of losing that paycheck. They're terrified of losing the status that comes along with it, which is why we get all these retired agents that sit there and they say, well, the FBI is still pretty good. You guys, we just need to clean it up. No, the FBI is not good. Your reputation is tied to the FBI. And so you've got skin in the game here, and you're not a credible source. So many of these people are so weak and cowardly. It makes me want to puke right now.
Steve, we found out the DNI office is urging the intelligence community to avoid problematic phrases like radical Islamists. Problematic. Oh, gosh, we just have a bunch of teenage girls that run the country now. In what ways were you handcuffed? Did you ever feel handcuffed from just tackling an issue because of all this woke filth today?
There was definitely that Damocles sword hanging over your head. It started particularly for me, and I'm sure for Kyle as well, when there was the mandate that we had to get the vaccine for coronavirus, and neither one of us were willing to comply with that. And we have it on good authority that you go up to the Human Resources Division within the FBI, which is arguably the most important component of it, because they get to decide training, decide personnel, and personnel is policy. They don't even have an American flag hanging. They have a rainbow flag because this is the US of gay now. I think that, again, we are back to building a compliant workforce that is either going to just put their heads down and be very granular in their responsibilities, because the FBI is a pyramid and there's a political capture at the very top. But on the very bottom of the pyramid, the broad base of it, you can be assigned something that's relatively innocuous. And if you're unwilling or willfully ignorant enough to not take a step back and look at the full mosaic and realize that you are part of a broken system, yeah, you might not be dropping the Zyklon B into the chamber, but you're putting them on the cattle car to Auschwitz. Well, just follow orders, and that's what's valued. I went back. I had the misfortune of actually going back and listening to the audio recording I have of my meeting with my senior executives. And they told me that I should set an example for my children and just follow orders. That is the type of person that the FBI is recruiting right now. They're not interested in upstanding people of integrity. The vetting process is to remove those people from consideration.